Hey everyone, it's Matt Hips, and this is my digital story of my socialization. So, my primary socially constructed identities that I've chosen are African American, male, and a father. I do think it's important to point out that although those are the identities I selected, there's a lot more that makes me who I am. And it's important to recognize that even though the characteristics I chose are things that you can see, there's a lot under the surface that helps to shape the person that I am and the person that all of us are. My identities have largely been an exercise in contradictions. I've gotten a lot of messages about who I am from the world and a lot of messages about who I am from my family, and those have often conflicted. And I've had to work through those contradictions to help me become the person that I am today. The first identity I chose is race, and it's probably the most important identity to me. As a black man, I was taught that I existed inside of an oppressive system, and that system dictated that there were certain rules to the game of life that I was playing. The first was that the game was inherently rigged, that nothing was going to come easy, and that I was going to be a target, so I needed to act accordingly. People would watch me differently, look at me differently, think about me differently. I had to remember that I was being evaluated on a different scale than other people, and that I shouldn't expect fairness, but I should always fight to be great. I was taught that race was a responsibility, that you had a responsibility to those who came before you to make the world better for those who come after you. In addition, I was taught that this was just the way that life worked, but we do have the ability to make choices to try to overcome that. Those messages came from both external and internal forces. The positive messages largely came from my family and my education. The more I learned, the more I realized what inequalities existed. In addition, my own personal experience helped me navigate that. The negative messages largely came from the media and also my life experiences. I learned about fairness and justice through the interactions that I had. The impact that this has had on my life is that I work hard to instill fairness and pride and difference in my children and in my students. I try to teach them that they don't have to be what the stories say that they are, and that I work to be a living example of how you can overcome obstacles and stereotypes. My second identity is as a man. I was taught about gender roles largely with religious overtones. I grew up in a Southern Baptist home and was taught that men were the providers and the head of the household. It really, to me, seemed like a system that sort of maintained patriarchy under the guise of religion. I was also taught as a man, and as a black man especially, to repress my feelings, both physically and emotionally, not to show vulnerability, not to cry, to really be kind of emotionally stoic. All right? I was also taught not to admit that I had problems, right? Men keep their problems inside and they deal with them on their own. They don't ask for help. They don't allow themselves to be vulnerable. And lastly, I was taught that men take what they want, that taking what you want was shown as a sign of strength. Those messages were consistent in television, from my family, from my peers, also just from the structure of society, the way that the rules of the game were set up, how men and women are largely treated based on the structures that exist in society. Those structures reward male aggressiveness and punish female diminutiveness, right? We were rewarded for being loud. We were rewarded for being angry. These messages really shaped me because it made me realize what privilege I have as a man and the importance of dismantling that cycle of toxic masculinity. Teaching my sons and my students that it's okay to be vulnerable. And I try to do that through acknowledging my own vulnerabilities, admitting my own mistakes, and not acknowledging my inadequacies, and showing them that it's okay to be vulnerable and that you can still be masculine and possess those qualities. I also try to elevate voices that are not normally elevated in the conversation. My third identity is as a father. And the messages that I received about fatherhood were really interesting. A lot of them centered around the idea that, like, dads don't actually have to be present. Your job was to be a provider. Men were almost viewed as a parental accessory. Women do the hard work while men get to do the fun stuff. It was manifested in people being surprised when I would be doing basic fatherly duties. My dad, on the other hand, taught me that a man's job as a father is to be present and to make sure that you are a good dad, that that's your primary goal. Messages largely came from my family. Those are my positive messages. The more negative messages came from the media and the community more broadly, and the sort of gender roles that are entrenched in the way that we think. The impact on my life is that I work to break gender stereotypes related to traditional expectations of fatherhood. I try to teach my children that being a father isn't about roles, and it's really about the effort that you put in and the time that you put in. In my classroom, I try to be a nurturer. I try to help students develop the best version of themselves and offer support wherever I can in a paternalistic sort of way. Not one that sort of diminishes their individuality as people, but as sort of that role model and guidance figure. I feel like all of this has really shaped me to understand that liberation is my ultimate goal. And I do this in a couple ways. The first way is through self-reflection, always trying to improve myself, always trying to acknowledge that I can get better, that I can realize new things, that I can learn new information. But I do it with my students and my sons by teaching them that getting out of the system is hard. Achieving liberation requires reframing the conversation, helping people to recognize that you don't have to be what the stories tell you that you have to be, that we have to call out oppression when we see it. It's Harry Potter-esque, and that fear of the name only increases fear of the thing itself. When we don't call things what they are, we give them more power. So I teach my students and my children to call things what they are. Finally, I teach them they have to be part of the solution. If they want things to get better, they have to be part of the solution. And I work very hard to elevate voices, not replace them. So I stand beside students, I stand behind students, or I stand in front of students to deflect when that's necessary. But I never want to replace their voice. I only want to elevate it. It's been great allowing you guys to get to know me a little better. I look forward to getting to know you guys.